Recorded live at Talks and Tasting Studios, it's the Clerical Errors Podcast, the podcast that shows you what's behind the collar. Let's go.
From the keep that in. From the Talks and Tasting Studios, this is the Clerical Errors Podcast, the podcast that shows you
what's behind the collar.
This is Bullhagen.
This is Berg. This is
Peter's
Vicar.
here.
Hey, Pete.
Actually, there's no Vicar here today.
No. He's too busy expanding his family.
Thanks be to God.
His precious daughter was born. Woohoo!
Nice. So, what do you think about, right off the bat, let's just get into it.
All right.
So, what do you think? I'm kind of leaning more now towards having the baptism in the hospital as opposed to, and then having like a recognition in church. Just because babies die,
Not opposed to it.
I mean, like, you look at the early days, they didn't wait till a Sunday to baptize. They brought them the day that they were born over to baptize them in the baptistry. So,
Yeah.
Well, before that, they waited 12 days, right?
8 days for circumcision.
8 days.
So
They did emergency circumcisions, right?
no, I think something really bad has to happen to you before emergency circumcisions happen.
Any member.
that imagine your last moment of life. What are you doing?
Well, that's especially got to be tough when, like, those guys in Shechem, right? They all get circumcised so they can, join the church, right?
Right.
And then while they're all in pain, Levi and that, they come in. It's basically like drowning somebody in the baptismal font. Not cool, yo.
Well, they're not sure what we're talking about. Look it up. They should make a movie about it.
They could. I mean, HBO doesn't have to do any of these fake shows.
Right.
Bible's got enough. Like, all you have to do is like follow what it is,
So I do have a speed
I was
top
gonna
12
say
list.
before we go, today is also Super Bowl Sunday.
Right.
Da 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 da.
Berg,
So
do you know who's playing?
Who's playing, Berg?
I know the chefs are.
Okay.
It's almost right, yeah.
So,
And the quarterback?
Well, all they're missing is an eye.
Right.
Oh, that's a lame joke. Peter, don't cut that out.
Well, you're of course it's the Chiefs because being the Taylor Swift fan that you are.
Of course.
You know me. So
If you listen back, by the way, to early episodes, he always, for some reason, came up with a Taylor Swift.
I know times have changed.
Right.
So now I listen to sea shanties and a lot of like 40s music. It's pretty great.
Nice.
So who do you guys think is going to win, the Chiefs or the Eagles?
Actually, I think the Eagles are going to win. That's so if you're
that's
using
why your
us
chief
for
hymn.
money.
Your chief hymn today was, and he will raise you up on eagle's wings. That was pretty good
today. We got a great Berg today. Yeah. So the reason
Actually,
why
how many churches do you think are actually going to sing that? Because I bet you it's not a small number. Like in the Philly area, come on, man. There's going to be a lot of churches singing on Eagles' wings.
Yeah, I know. Probably.
Now, are you guys for or against the demon magic the Chiefs have done to win every game this season?
What is this?
They have won so many games by like blocked kicks, missed kicks,
Happenstance.
Refs calls. That one's debated by some.
That's true.
It is forbidden to talk. My wife is a Chiefs fan, so I'm forbidden to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's like she's never been so protective of my name. But if I talk about Patrick Mahomes, careful.
See, and now you've broken the magic spell. So,
well, here's the thing, okay? So the refs are going to go out of their way to show that this one isn't rigged.
Well, no, I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
After last game, I don't think it matters.
Yeah. So this is what's going to happen then. The Chiefs are going to win on some random technicality, and then Kelsey is going to propose to Taylor Swift in the Super Bowl celebration.
Oh, we said that for like 2 years in a row, though, right?
What are they waiting for?
She needs to write another hit or so.
I guess it's more likely now that she's done with her tour, right?
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, get married already. You're not
So what do you
spring
think?
chickens
I think
anymore.
I think the Chiefs are going to win. I think the Chiefs are going to win,
Okay.
and I think it's going to be the same way as the rest of the year.
And-
it's going to be stupid.
And I will root for the Chiefs for this reason. For the sanctity of marriage, that maybe that win will spur them to get married and honor the sacred institution designed by God of the uniting of one man and one woman in marriage.
Okay, I'm going to be the odd man out and go cheer for the Eagles. Just to, be a.
Well, they have
be
an
that,
Iowa legend on the team.
To be
so
that
you hate
guy.
America.
You know me.
So enough talking about football. Okay, I've got a top 12 list. Well, I ran out of time because I literally did this in 3 minutes. Like, I got here at like 5:30 and I was like 3 minutes late to the computer because I was writing my top 12 list. So no one's really interested in the Super Bowl when something just happened that was earth-shaking. Anybody know what it is?
The guy who voiced He-Man died at the age of 88 a day ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. All right, we'll have to come up with some. Use your Gronk. What is it you use?
I don't use it. One of the devoted listeners of the show uses Grok.
Biblical lessons that we learned from He-Man. All right, but
So
I have.
Are you referring to the monumental Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis trade?
That is correct. Can you believe that? Bird.
I can't believe it, dude. I can't believe how do you trade? How do you make that trade?
Right.
What are they thinking?
Right. So this, Berg, you don't understand, okay? This is like one of the biggest trades ever in the NBA, okay? It happens while I'm sleeping, right? So I get up at 3 o'clock. I'm supposed to be concentrating on writing a sermon. Just kidding. And then all this news about Luka Doncic being traded for Anthony Davis. Like, what are you doing? This is like top 3 player for.
Anthony Davis is not a top 3 player.
He's decent.
He's
good.
aight. No,
he's aight.
He's fine. He's not a top 3 player.
I mean, he is a rim protector. He is a great defender. He can get you buckets if you don't have a strong, agile center that you're playing against. But he's not Luka, and Luka's only 25. Oh.
That man will never leave the Lakers.
Yeah. So we just lost a bunch of audience, but this is for me. These are my speed top 12, the top 12 storylines and questions of the Anthony Davis Luka Doncic trade.
Peter, play the intro.
Enough nonsense. It's time for Bullhagen's Top 12.
I'm so ready for this.
Number
Yeah,
12.
Peter, are the Lakers done? Can they get a rim protector before the trade deadline hits? Number 11. Will Luka take valuable minutes away from Bronny?
Number 10.
That's funny. Dirk Nowitzki has been cemented as the greatest Mav of all time.
Number 9.
Austin Reeves now gets to take a more natural 2 as to 1 as a main ball handler that he has been doing. He needs to be a 2, and Luka needs to take the ball.
Number 8.
Made a break.
Did LeBron know? Did he know?
Absolutely.
Number 7.
100%.
Wait. He said that he was having dinner when he found out.
Yeah.
You don't trade Anthony Davis for Luka Doncic. All right.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
LeBron.
Without LeBron knowing.
Yep.
He knows everything. He got his son drafted.
LeBron set it up. What do you mean?
I thought this was speed top 12.
Oh. All right. Number 5. Did the Mavs actually make a win now move with Kyrie as the main ball handler and stout defense? They actually might be better in the short term. if Anthony Data Davis can stay healthy. Number 3.
4. Okay.
How many do you
number
have?
4. Hey, can Luka Doncic actually stay in game shape? Will he follow LeBron's lead in taking care of his body, who at 40 years old, 15 years older, is stronger and fitter than the 25-year-old Luka Doncic? Maybe he'll have an effect. That LA lifestyle is different. They got a lot of good food in Dallas. That one's the speed. Number 3. Will Mavs fans ever forgive the ownership?
No, never. Can you imagine?
What would be an equivalent to that Berg would understand? Because he has no idea what we're talking about.
No context.
Dude, Jesus just traded away Peter for literally anybody else. Like, what's the point, man? Like, I thought you were going to build your church on this guy. Nope, he's going to the Lakers.
There it is. Number 2, LeBron. He might have to play some 4 now. You're 6'9", 270, 280. You don't have the foot speed quite laterally that you had. You might have to start playing some 4. Let Luka cook. You gotta let Luka cook. Number 1, where is the Lakers defense gonna come?
Who needs it, man? That's what I say.
Oh, did Jason Kidd, is he happy about this? Imagine you're the coach of the Mavs and all of a sudden, oh yeah, he didn't even know apparently. Like you're the coach of the Mavericks. You take a top 3 player, you trade him away. I'm sorry.
I can't do anything but point and laugh. Why would they do that?
Sorry, Berg, you were on a roll. I hijacked the show.
Great.
I was watching lunch and I burst out laughing when I saw it on the TV. Just in the middle of a restaurant, I saw this trade and I was like, I pointed at the screen from the bar and said, "There's no way that's real."
Berg, there are people who are using this as a marker in time. Like, where were you when you heard about the Luka trade? Mm-hmm. This is like JFK level.
Yeah, I think there was a hymn written about this. Have you forgotten about that trade?
So,
sorry, I'll stop. We'll stop.
So
geeking
behind
out
the
now.
collar, what was Pastor Bullhagen thinking about? I was thinking about the trade.
Nice.
If you search Luka Don, is it Doncic? I've always heard Chich.
I think it's Chich.
Okay.
Like the C in Slovenian is.
Yeah. The first.
Hey Berg, you know much about Slovenia?
I actually don't know a whole bunch about Slovenia, so.
The first link is ESPN's headline. The quote is unfathomable how this stunning trade took place.
Like the guy who first reported it on Twitter or X or whatever, he had to say, like, my account has not been hacked.
Lakers confirmed the trade by saying, quote, "The NBA is wild, man."
Oh. See.
Yeah. The drama. The drama. Do you know how bad it was? Okay. So bad, Kanye West was in the middle of a Twitter rant. He hadn't been on Twitter in years. He was on one. He stopped the Twitter rant. He said something like, "I don't know anything about basketball, but this is crazy."
Oh.
Tell me that's not gold. I'm sorry. We should be talking about Transfiguration, but
Don't worry, the Mavs will get a 2029 first round draft pick.
we gotta stop this, Peter, because I are the only one that care in the entire listening audience. All right, Peter, what am I preaching on?
This is the Transfiguration of our Lord, Matthew chapter 17, 1-9. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, There appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. As Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. And when the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise, and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead.
All right. So, you've preached this many times. How long have you been in the ministry now, Berg? Are you like 12 years, something like that?
Yeah, I'm in my 12th year, so 11 full years.
Look at you.
Living the dream.
So you've preached this many times. There's a lot to go here, right?
Yeah, there's quite a bit.
Right. So one is Jesus kind of giving a glimpse of who he really is.
Mm-hmm.
You can think of this the way I kind of like to talk about the baptism of Jesus, of giving a vision of what's really happening from a day to day. Even though Jesus looked normal, looked ordinary, he did some miracles, right? But Peter, James, and John needed to hear that, no, he really knows what he's talking about. And this is what is really going on. This is who you're actually dealing with. Don't get it twisted. This is the one that Moses and Elijah pointed to. He is the fulfillment of it, which is something that they needed to hear, which, as the text would point out, they really didn't understand it anyways until after the resurrection. You also have an interesting, the appearing of Moses and Elijah kind of shows of, something about life. They weren't images of them. They weren't facsimiles of Moses and Elijah, but actually Moses and Elijah. I wonder how they recognized them.
I think in a glorified state, even sinful man can recognize things. I mean, look at Adam. Adam could recognize that Eve was bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. He could recognize the nature of the animals.
Sure.
And this is why we will know people in heaven who have been dead for centuries. We will recognize who they are.
Right.
Yeah, with that, I mean, Moses died and was buried. Elijah was taken to heaven without dying. This shows both states of humanity. The dead shall rise first and be glorified, but we who remain, we who are alive until the coming of the Lord, will not die but be changed. So there will be people who will never die, like Elijah, but they will be changed on the last day, and both are glorified, both are with Christ, both share in his glory, and they themselves are transfigured. He is this way by nature, but this is given to us by grace because we're adopted into the family of God. And as John says, we will be like him, for we will see him as he is. We also see the provisional or temporary nature of this, because after 6 days, not the seventh day, right? Or
Right.
the eighth day, but the sixth day, there's still things to do. They have to come down from the mountain, just
Right.
as we have to come down from the mountain and enter into Lent, because we still struggle here with sin, with death and the devil and the like.
Question, Berg. So, do you forego the Alleluias now for pre-Lent?
I do. There's a great essay on this. What is it? Septuagesima questions or something like that. The Missile Project has put it out, and I thought that they've had some really good stuff. Sorry for the stuff. Septuagesimal Strife is what it's called. And it was published back in 2021. And then I really like his introduction here. Every year without fail, the approach of Septuagesima sees Lutheran blogs and social media filled with confusion and questioning. The author has had the dubious pleasure of witnessing these discussions for the last decade or so. And so the questions always seem to be the same. What, if anything, changes or disappears during Septuagesima? Are the colors changed? Are the Alleluias absent? Does the Gloria in Excelsis vanish, never to be seen again until Maundy Thursday or the Vigil of Easter? And then he continues to go on here. So he actually looks at all of those kind of things. So people are interested, you can look that up. So
I must admit, I'm not quite there yet.
So yeah, that's, he goes through the history of what Lutherans have done in the past and why.
Right.
So.
Right. I need to be more versed in that myself.
I view the Gesima Sundays, it's kind of like pre-gaming Lent. This way I can continue to pre-game even though football is over.
Right.
So,
That's perfect timing, right?
Indeed.
For those who are big football fans, now they have to enter in the time of repentance after the football season.
Yeah, I mean, that's just every Vikings fan.
Right.
Always. So,
right, they have their time of repentance came early this year.
Well, they're always repenting because they're always wearing purple.
Right.
So,
it's all making sense. What does that say about the Packers?
Well,
green.
Yeah, green is life, man. Green is life. Green and gold.
Another thing that you can point out is the fact that in that Transfiguration, where Jesus kind of shows who he really is and kind of overwhelms the ordinary that they were used to, that they found overwhelming. When people want to see the glory of God, you can see how by God's grace, he does not give that to us. It would be too much for us. He hides himself in mercy in ways that we can receive.
Yeah. And I think this is kind of we all as human beings need mountaintop experiences, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
Just to keep, we need some wins. And I think that's the thing is like Jesus here is giving them a little win, even though it's not the big win. The big win actually happens when he dies and is raised from the dead, which is why the Transfiguration isn't necessarily the point, right?
So to explain this to the NBA fan, right? The Luka Doncic trade, okay, Luka, if you're listening, call us and let us know. The trade, it was like a win for the Lakers. Does it mean that they're going to win the championship? Not until they fix their defense, But it's a win. They got Luka. But I would say too is that's a kind of win that reminds them of who they were dealing with this whole time. And it's a kind of win where you think, okay, what is actually going on Sunday morning? Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am with them. Well, what does it look like? Well, it's ordinary day to day, but who is he actually? Which is why historically churches are ornate and heavenly. This is why in a lot of churches above the altar you have the circling of the angels and the archangels to make it a heavenly place, to show that, in a sense, to try and give a view of what is really going on in our meager human ways.
I think you should have cherubim just kind of flying around, little cherubs flying around at Trinity in Hampton.
Get like maybe what would be the best way? Maybe through drones or.
Well, and then they could like tickle the kids when they fall asleep and like hit the old guys who fall asleep.
Or how about like a little like floating helium ones? They just kind of roam around.
Yeah, I like it.
And then during the words of institution, they kind of circle.
Yeah, or they could pass the offering plates and then pass them back if they don't give enough. Could have like an AI thing.
Right. Nice.
Because how can you say no to an angel, even a robotic one?
I think you should be able to give offering through your smartwatch.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised how many people really don't like that idea.
Yeah.
It's just really, really interesting to see just the reluctance and antipathy towards it. Like online giving, people hate it.
Right. I like it. Keeps the revenue stream going through the summer.
Well, and, because it's almost like this pietistic view of, well, if you don't write out the check, you're not really giving. It's like, well, if I've planned out to give this much throughout the year and it's a direct deposit, it's like, I've already made that choice for the year, So,
right. It's like an Instapot. Set it and forget it.
So, and you're still giving. That's the thing. I mean,
See, that's a trick is you have like like you plan the best Sunday ever, right? You have like everyone's favorite hymns that you've been holding off on, right? That you know that everyone wants you to sing, but you don't very often. Unless you have like 4 hard ones and you want to throw one that everyone likes just so they're not mad at you when they're shaking your hands.
Ha!
You know, have all 5 of them, and then like everyone's like fired up, and then you say, okay, let's fill out the online giving sheet.
There you go. There you go.
So they set it at a high mark. Forget it. This is why I don't touch the stewardship committee, by the way.
Ha! Okay, so
there's
where are we going?
A lot there. There's a lot there. I don't know. I still kind of want to talk about the trade, but I can't.
You could. Just make it theological.
I need another one of those mints from Vicar.
Ha!
All right. So what do you want to do? You got this is where I love you, Berg, because you always have something in the hopper. Like if you ask Berg, well, what have you been thinking about? What have you been working on? You usually have like 5 things. Like you ask me what I think about. Can you believe that trade? But so which one of your many things would you like to talk about today?
Okay, so we can talk about the translation work I've been doing on the Elector Bible or the Weimar Bible. We could continue what we started talking about with Bultmann in his Marburg sermons, or we could talk about the Gilded Age and the end of the Civil War and that sort of thing. So,
ooh, let's talk about the Gilded Age.
Okay. Do you know why it's called the Gilded Age?
Because that was when the Altar Guild first got its...
It's actually from a Mark Twain novel, an eminently forgettable novel, but he actually calls it the Gilded Age there. And so he kind of names that age from the end of 1865 with the death of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency of McKinley, which really starts the Progressive Age. And I've been listening to a book, And to the Republic for Which It Stands, which is about this time period. And it's very interesting.
How many years are we talking about?
So 1865 to 1897. So 65 to 97. So you're talking, what?
32 years?
32 years.
So we're talking about an entire Anthony Davis lifetime.
Yeah. And in these 32 years, you actually have quite a bit of changes, right? You have the end of the Civil War. You have the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad.
Right.
You have really the conquest, what we consider the Wild West era, happening, right? With You also have the giants of industry with Carnegie and with, who are some others that we know? Well, the guys... Vanderbilt, who built the Biltmore Mansion, for example. Or who did U.S. Steel? Oh, man, what was his name? You'll think about it.
Ben Roethlisberger.
Once I get it, I'll just shake my head.
J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan, Charles Schwab. You have all these guys, right? And these are really the faces of the Gilded Age, right? It's not presidents and it's not famous men. It's actually like businessmen. And so you see an increase in wages across the board, but you also see fabulous wealth among some of these nouveaux riches, the newly rich. And so it's a really interesting age. I haven't gotten too far into it. I'm still dealing with Reconstruction right now. And really, Reconstruction teaches us that no matter what kind of laws you put into place, unless there is a change spiritually, it doesn't really work. So, for example, the North wanted to replace slavery with contracts. And so they thought, well, if black people sign contracts, well, then they're free, because there's not only freedom to set your price on what you're going to work for, but there's also obligations to work. So it gets you away from forced labor. Well, the problem is that some of these contracts written in the South were basically forced labor.
Right.
And laws that were meant to stop idleness, like vagrancy laws, were so expanded that basically you could accuse a black person of being a vagrant. If he didn't have any cash in his pocket, you could imprison him and then force him to labor for you. And so it shows that really, no matter what kind of laws you pass, if the heart isn't right, it really doesn't matter. People are going to find ways around these laws. No matter how hard you work at it, no matter how much blood is spilt over this, ultimately, laws don't change people in the same way that the law doesn't create life. It's like Paul says in Galatians, if there had been a law that had given life, then righteousness would have been by the law. The law preserves life, but it can't give life, right? Only the gospel can give life. And so that's, something that I've been considering as well. So,
yeah, it's interesting if you compare that with the idea that this had an effect on the Lutheran Church as well as part of this Gilded Age, because who were coming over, like that's when a lot of our, like the German Lutherans came over, wasn't it?
Yeah, you see a huge emigration over to the United States. And in fact, that's where we did a lot of our mission work, was among Germans, because there were so many of them coming, because we wanted them to be saved. And, a lot of them came for economic reasons. They didn't come for spiritual reasons, but they found spiritual reasons when they came here.
And in that time of building, if you look at a lot of the churches built in that era, am I getting my times confused? But
yeah, some of them are still around, right? Like St. Paul's in Fort Wayne, for example. That's a fairly old church,
right?
I mean,
that's where you find a lot of the bigger constructed churches. When you see a church and you think, well, imagine trying to build that again.
Yeah, and you see people and a lot of the Germans who came over for the land, and that's good, right? They thought that land would make them independent, and in many cases it did, and that's a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the laborers that came, like for example, a lot of my family were kind of city workers in Milwaukee, and my great grandfather worked at the Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Living the dream.
Right. But I think when you talk about that age in America, it was something that was very beneficial to the Lutheran Church here, which had an effect really worldwide when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I mean, we have been the beneficiaries of that time period, even though we really didn't engage in a lot of the political questions of the day. Nevertheless, and this is why we're primarily an agricultural church body, right? The Midwest was giving away a lot of land. I mean, the Homestead Act was a big deal.
Right.
And so it makes sense. It makes sense that we would be focused primarily in rural areas, and that still hasn't changed, really.
Right. Right. I mean,
it's amazing
where you find a lot of German emigrations, you're still going to find a lot of Lutherans.
Right. Well, and think about it this way, okay? So we have like 80 congregations in the Wyoming district, which includes like Nebraska, a little bit of Colorado, that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we're a state of about 500,000, right? Okay. So not that big, right? But 80 congregations. Mm-hmm. But look at places like Vermont, same size as Iowa, but we have 3 congregations there.
Yeah.
So I think this also gives us the opportunity to say, okay, yeah, this is where we're from. At the same time, there are places in the United States that need to hear the gospel, like a lot. And we should be focusing on some of these places that don't necessarily have a large Lutheran presence.
Because as much that the cultural aspect of that is fuzzy now. It's like, you'll still find a lot of German names in a congregation, but to say, okay, that connection is fuzzy, and I think sometimes we can almost get into that cultural thing without forgetting that it has nothing to do with whether you're German or not.
Yeah, I mean,
just where we came from.
In the old days, and that's part of the issue, is like, I think culture is important if culture is Christian. Like, it's good to celebrate. I prefer German culture, where we celebrated Christmas, to Puritan culture, which outlawed Christmas.
Right.
You know, I think that Puritan culture there is bad culture, right? We should stay away from it.
Right.
Right? The problem is when, and I think Garrison Keillor is like the worst culprit of this, right? Because he focuses so much on Lutheran, that is like Scandinavian Lutheran culture, that he misses the kernel. He misses the thing that actually gives it life, which is the gospel.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you know, I view culture as kind of like, it's kind of the shell, right? Culture is supposed to protect the kernel. Culture is supposed to allow the kernel to grow into the wonderful tree of the gospel where the birds nest, right?
Right. The whole kind of pat them on the head. Aren't these Lutherans cute? These quaint little Lutherans.
Oh, you know, these church ladies in the basement with their little hot dishes and their lutefisk and da-da-da-da-da, right?
Right. And then has he actually met them? Has he actually talked about what's important to them? You know?
Well, and that's the thing is, I think even for us, the danger is always to confuse the culture, which is the shell, right? It's the scaffolding.
Right.
The culture is meant to help and to propagate the gospel, right? Kind of like confirmation, right? Confirmation is a scaffolding that is a cultural thing that is supposed to help us to teach the young everything that Jesus has commanded.
Right.
Right? But the way in which we do confirmation is based on assumptions that may or may not exist any longer.
I mean, what you've basically described is the ceremonial law of the Old Testament.
Only that was commanded by God.
Right. But the idea, though, that, you know, it all had a reason and a purpose, and that was a culture that was, in some ways, people would say is bizarre or strange.
Right. You know, I think of the Rechabites when I think about this. You know, their dad told them not to drink strong wine and not to live in stone homes. They were supposed to live in tents and be nomadic. And the reason for this, even though it was not commanded by God, was that the Rechabites are not Israelites. They're Kenites. They come from Moses' father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
But they respect the traditions of their father, and God commends them for it because it is there to teach them something very, very important, that they are not Israelites. The Messiah is not going to come from them, even though they believe in the God of Israel, even though they trust in the promise of the Messiah. And that's what culture should always be. Culture should always be pointing us to the gospel. It should always be a way in which we raise our children to believe in the gospel. And whenever we do culture for culture's sake, I mean, and you'll see it today too, and it's just so heartbreaking and heartrending, where you have Lutheran churches that don't have their own pastor and indeed don't have church every Sunday, but they have historical status to preserve the building, and then they will have particular feeds like lutefisk feeds or apple skeever feeds or whatever, right? And it's like, who cares? Who cares? That culture has lost the seed. It's lost the gospel. It's like fingernails growing on a corpse. It's like, okay, yeah, there's still some life here, but it's quickly dying. It's quickly going away. So
they grow?
Oh, yeah. There are cells in the body that grow, I want to say like 18 to 24 hours after death. And they were talking about this, that actually it can be very bad for transplant patients because then some of those cells go into hyperdrive to keep themselves alive. And so it can actually cause cancer in transplant patients.
Interesting. So going back to the culture thing, this is a good discussion.
Okay.
Because this is a discussion that sometimes will bring strife within a congregation. Because a pastor oftentimes will try to bring a certain culture for the sake of the gospel into the congregation. We talked about a little bit where with the Alleluias in pre-Lent.
Yep.
And I want to talk about it because there's good culture things that we can learn in creating that kind of culture where why don't we sing the Alleluias here, and what is the point of that, where you can learn and understand and have theological points. But at the same time, it's really hard to get that culture in the minds of the people in the pews because they don't always get it.
Yep.
And so that always is, I think, a miscommunication between pastor and the people in the congregation in many ways, where a lot of the things that they're actually talking past each other are these cultural things in a way, when it comes to meaning cultural and the way you talked about it, protecting the gospel.
Yeah. And I think that's where these conversations have to be very open, and on the pastors need to understand that the people are trying to protect the gospel. That's their intention.
Right.
And we see this very, very clearly in another church body, the Russian Orthodox Church, when they went in and they changed, some of the liturgical things, whether you cross yourself 2 times or 3 times, or whether you use three fingers to cross yourself or 2 fingers, riots started. And in fact, this group today still exists. They're called the Old Believers, and they're very prevalent, like in Canada, in Alaska, and other places as well. You can actually read a very interesting story about this in a book called Lost in the Taiga, where an Old Believer family that fled during Stalin's purge was found 50 years later in the 1970s by Soviet geologists. Very interesting story. But
were they so orthodox that they became unorthodox?
Yes, actually, some of them. There are a couple different groups of Old Believers. But see, the problem with them is they thought they were defending the gospel. At the same time, because they were so tied to their culture, some of these Old Believers have actually lost the priesthood. They don't have priests anymore. So they can't have the Lord's Supper. It's weird. They got weird because of their culture.
Right.
So that's the danger for the lay people. For the pastor needs to view himself as being the bringer of a wider Christian culture because he simply knows more, right? Mm-hmm. He can look back and say, yeah, this is what they've done in history. At the same time, you have to be not a jerk.
You are someone entering a culture that already exists.
Right. And this is where Goethe's famous saying actually rings true, right? Gray are ideas and golden are the leaves of experience. We can't be such idealists and say, well, the church ought to be this way. Well, you have to deal with the church as it is.
Right.
And that's not all bad.
Because you're dealing with people who are a product of what they've heard, what they've been taught. And like you said, they feel as though they're protecting the gospel because, for example, if someone says, oh, why can't we sing those old hymns? And a pastor will think, oh, like Shepherd of Tender Youth.
Right. Or Christ is the World's Redeemer, written by Columbana, 1,300 years ago.
Right. No, I mean like the old ones, like Beautiful Savior, because in their mind, that's what it is. And pastors need to realize that even though there might be some of the hymns that aren't their favorite, it is what was used to nourish them before you got there.
Right.
And in some ways, we step on all sorts of sacred cows, but what does that feel like to the parishioner? Like you're stepping on something that was very important to me. So it's a delicate balance with that and it takes for the parishioner to understand this too, to trust your pastor in what he's doing.
Right. And they love those hymns because they are familiar to them. And it's like, okay, throw them a bone every once in a while and then raise the next generation
right
to love better things. That's great. Right? But that means you have to be in it for the long haul.
Right.
And that means you have to bear with things.
a culture change within a congregation takes years and years and years.
Right. And you can't be an idealist. I mean, you can't just love the idea of love itself. You actually have to love the thing that exists. And in the congregation, there's good and there's bad and there's ugly. It's just the way, just like in you.
Right.
So, that's where taking things as they are and moving forward with it,
Right. And for the
and that means you actually have to love them.
Right.
And that means they actually have to love and trust you.
Right.
And if you're the dad, right, which is what you're supposed to be, well, kids sometimes say things to you that are not all the nicest.
Yeah.
So you put up with it.
But it also reminds me, too, is for the person in the pew who might be struggling with some of these things, okay? Sometimes when a pastor leads a church in a different direction, this is how some might hear it. You're saying that the last pastor was wrong, or it seems as though you're making a judgment call on a pastor or a situation long before. So, you might hear something, so was this wrong this whole time or something? And there is room to say, I'm not saying certain things were wrong, but is there a better way, a clearer way to do something or to say?
Right.
And I think that's also what because it can be, it's like on a micro scale, what Catholics go through every time a pope changes, where like what's going on? Like, you go from one pope to the other, and as a Catholic, you are there to honor and listen to the pope, and one pope will say things and do things drastically different than the previous pope, and that kind of throws people, because I think that happens in a church between pastors sometimes, and I don't think pastors are trying to cause that kind of division. We're not here to judge the work of another pastor. We only can call it as we see it and do the best that we can in a way that people can hear and learn it.
Well, I was talking to a new pastor in our circuit, and he was mentioning how the people in his parish were, noticing all the little things that he did that were different. And it's like, you know what? Sometimes people just do things different. That's
right.
Okay. That's okay. And, if you have a question, please just ask in a way.
Right.
Like we don't have to be offensive about these things, okay?
I'll use myself as an example, right? As much as I would like to have like do more high church type liturgy, I don't have the attention span to remember all the little things.
That's why you need a vicar.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There are some pastors who are just more gifted at that. And I think part of it is there are certain things that some pastors take great meaning in that was very helpful for them that maybe I miss, that I get it in a different way. You and I are perfect examples of this, right? We're very different people, and we come to the same conclusions in very different ways.
Right.
And but that's just it. That's why you have different pastors, and that's why not every pastor, the call process has it in such a way where maybe a pastor would be better serving at a different congregation that fits his personality and some of those things a little better.
Well,
sometimes. And
I think, don't you think too, part of this is like the pastor is always going to be the outsider. He just is. By the very nature of his office, he has to stand outside of the church, the congregation, both above it when he speaks God's word and below it in that he belongs to them, as Paul says. And so he is always going to be an outsider, and human nature in regards to outsiders, the fallen human nature typically takes it as suspicion, right? You're not one of us, therefore what you're doing must be X, Y, or Z. And that's a temptation that everybody has to fight, right?
Yeah, behind the collar. An example, right? So I've been here in Hampton for 23, 24 years, something like that. And the longer I'm here, the more I know that if I retire here, guess what? Poof. I'm going to have to disappear.
Yep. Yeah, you're going to have to go to a different congregation.
Right. I'm going to have to, this is where I've really raised my family and I built my life. But, as much as I would love to, at that point, stay and how hard it would be, but that's the nature of what I'm called to do, because I'm going to have to force myself in that situation if I'm not somewhere else to actually be gone.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's hard for a lot of retired pastors to do because like, a pastor's going to come in and do things different. And even if you're all on the same page, he's going to be different.
Yeah.
He's going to have a different personality, a different way of doing things, a different way of talking, a different way of preaching, a different way of doing the liturgy, all sorts of things. And
that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. Sometimes it is wrong, right? And that's a problem. But usually the sort of things we're talking about, it's not wrong.
Yeah.
And, even though your pastor is always an outsider, he's still a gift. He's a gift from God, right? When you ascended on high, he gave gifts to men. God gave apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers for the building up of the body of Christ, the edification of the body of Christ, to perfect the saints, to do the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
Not equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. False translation. Bad. Don't do it. Okay?
Does it deserve the article there in Spanish?
It needs a comma. So it really, instead of...
No, I mean Elbato.
Is
I
it
was talking
Elbato?
about
Yes,
that.
yes. It is Elbato, because actually there are some very interesting folks online who have gone cray-cray, who are now arguing from that passage. These used to be Missouri Synod Lutherans, and they're now arguing, well, now that we're perfected, we don't need pastors anymore.
Mm.
And so that's what they're arguing. But that's not what that passage says. It says it's not equipping the saints. It's the building up of the saints. It's the perfection of the saints, comma. Then the apostles, prophets, pastors, and teachers, they do the work of the ministry, the service, comma. They build up the body of Christ, comma.
Yes.
So important stuff there, because that's what your pastor is. He's a gift. And it's good that he's an outsider. He must be an outsider.
Right.
Because he has to stand outside of you. He has to be simultaneously above and below you as the congregation.
Yeah. And so interesting behind the collar stuff. Like, I'm in my 50s now. I don't know where I'm going to retire. I don't know where I'm going to be buried. I don't know any of those things.
You're going down to Florida. Come on.
It's still up in the air.
What? Arizona?
I don't know. Puerto
I've
Rico
got
is kind of nice sometimes.
Well, my folks are in Costa Rica right now, so sounds like it's pretty hot there.
Wow.
They're having fun.
The Gulf of America.
There we go.
Oh, nice. I saw a headline that said, there's a blizzard on the Gulf of America, and I just thought, man, life is going too fast.
It's great. I'm happy. I'm glad it's Mount McKinley again. So,
what was it before then?
They changed it from Mount McKinley to Denali, and now that's back to Mount McKinley.
Yeah, Denali was what they called it before Mount McKinley was christened.
They named it after a truck?
Ha!
But the Grand Tetons were always the Tetons.
Yeah, I know. We need a Mormon row, we could call it a Lutheran row. Right out there in front of the mountains. It'd be rad.
So Berg, before we close the show out, is there any, if you could rename anything in Lutherandom, what would you rename it? If you had power to rename maybe even the Missouri Synod, if you had the power to rename one of our universities, if you had the power.
That might be the good one. Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is like a really weird name. If you're not used to it, what do you mean Missouri Synod? What?
Right. Every news anchor calls it Synod.
Yeah. Well, and Cheers did too, which is hilarious. Well, and that's where it used to be the Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Missouri, Ohio, and other states.
So what would you rename Is there anything you would rename?
I don't know. I would like to have the word evangelical back because evangelical means gospel, and I wish we had that. I don't mind things being named for geographical areas, but actually we have more Lutherans. I think we had more churches and Lutherans in Indiana than we did in Missouri at that point.
Right.
So,
So
I don't know. I don't know. I get a little irritated with all the acronyms. Lutherans use acronyms like, gang signs. So,
right.
And then oftentimes I don't even know what the acronym is. So, but then you just go for it. You go with it because you don't want to look stupid, like you're not in the know. So
yeah, I like the fake acronyms where C for Christmas stands for like does it? Like the M for Merry Christmas stands for Mary.
So, one name that I would love to change is did you know this? The ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, Tejan, who was a president of the St. Louis Seminary, he actually argued that the new name of the Synod should be Evangelical Catholic. And I really wish they would have gone with that name because then they wouldn't be associated with Lutherans.
Yes.
But,
I've got something I would rename.
What's that?
I would rename the weight room at the seminary.
Oh, and what would it be called?
Okay.
The Bullhagen weight room.
So
listener, I'm thinking about getting this off the ground, of seeing what I can do to get a revamped weight equipment over at the Fort Wayne Seminary, because I whip these guys into shape and then they go back and they have to join Planet Fitness or something. We can't have that happen, can we? So
we can't.
Listeners, if you've made it this far through the podcast and you think I should consider seeing what I can do and starting a fundraiser, they can get a hold of us at Clerical Errors, feedback at clericalerrors.org. They can find us on Twitter at Clerical Errors P for podcast.
At me, bro.
We have a Patreon, which you can find at our website, clericalerrors.org, also our store. And you can even send an email to bullhagengymcts at clericalerrors.org.
Sounds amazing.
Can you make that an email, please?
Yeah,
Peter?
you got it. I got it.
All right. So I think that concludes our show.
Well, thanks. Thank you for listening. This is Bullhagen.
This is Berg.
And may the Maverick fan base grant absolution to the ownership of the Dallas Mavericks.
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Questions, thoughts, concerns? You can contact us on Facebook at facebook.com/clericalerrorspodcast, on Twitter at clericalerrorsp for podcast, or email us at feedback@clericalerrors.org. Thanks for listening to Clerical Errors. See you next time.